My name's Kylie, I'm 26, and last weekend I found out my dad canceled my spot on our family trip and never told me. When I asked him why, he just laughed and said, "You were never invited." I stood there with my suitcase in my hand, realizing I was no longer part of my own family. But what I did next, let's just say they won't forget it. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more true stories about family drama and quiet revenge. The sun was barely up when I zipped my suitcase shut. The wheels clicked against the hardwood as I dragged it down the hallway, half asleep but excited. I'd packed 2 days early, flannel shirts, a blanket, the book I'd been saving for this trip. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small family weekend at a cabin near Mount Hood. My dad had been talking about it for months, saying how everyone could use a break. For the first time in a long time, I felt like part of everyone. When I stepped into the kitchen, the smell of coffee hit me first, and then the sound. Drawers closing, suitcases zipping, footsteps rushing. My heart lifted for a second before it dropped like a stone. The counter was covered with travel mugs, road snacks, and Sarah's favorite pink hoodie. But something was off. My suitcase was the only one not near the door. Dad was tightening a strap on his duffel bag. Sarah was complaining that the Wi-Fi at the cabin better work. Mom, Ellen, was double-checking the GPS. I smiled awkwardly and asked, "What time are we leaving?" Dad didn't even look up. He laughed short and sharp. Kylie, you were never invited." The air left the room. It wasn't a joke. He didn't grin or wink. He just went back to packing. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd misheard. "Wait, what? You told me last week to get ready. You said." He cut me off with a shrug. "Plans changed. It's just going to be the three of us this time." I looked at Mom. She froze, eyes darting to the floor. "It's only for a couple days," she murmured. "We didn't want to make it complicated." Complicated. That was her favorite word for anything uncomfortable. Sarah, of course, grinned. "Don't take it so personal, Kentucky. It's just family time." I swallowed hard. I am family. Dad finally looked at me then, his eyes tired but cold. "You always make things heavy. We just want a quiet weekend. You should stay here, rest, maybe catch up on your job stuff." I laughed under my breath, the sound trembling. "So you canceled my spot? Without even telling me?" He zipped his bag, stood, and said it again, this time slower, almost amused. "You were never invited." And that was it. He picked up his keys and called out, "Let's go." The next few seconds blurred. Sarah hugged Mom, talking about playlists and snacks. The door swung open. I stood there with my suitcase handle still in my hand. Nobody looked back. When the car engine started, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger yet, just a kind of hollow quiet. The house went silent after they left. The clock ticked louder than usual. I could still hear their voices fading down the street, that mix of laughter and shallow chatter that used to include me. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the mug Dad left half full. I told myself not to cry. I told myself this wasn't new. But it felt new, because this time there wasn't even an excuse. By mid-morning, I was still sitting there, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Family dinners, birthdays, half-smiles that looked real at the time. Then one picture caught me. A photo from last year's cabin trip. Me and Sarah in front of the same cabin they were driving to right now. Dad had his arm around both of us back then. I remembered thinking that weekend might finally change things. It hadn't. A text buzzed on my phone. It was from Sarah. Just a picture of the car dashboard captioned "On our way," followed by 3 smiley faces. No words. Just proof. I didn't reply. Instead, I made myself a piece of toast I couldn't eat. The butter melted too fast, the bread turned soggy. I stared out the window, watching the neighbor's dog chase a squirrel. Everything looked painfully normal. By noon, I decided to distract myself. I started cleaning, the kind of mindless cleaning that fills silence. Dishes. Counters. The fridge. Anything to keep from thinking. But every small thing reminded me of them. Sarah's empty mug. Dad's baseball cap left on the hook. Mom's note on the fridge. Back Monday. Don't forget to water the fern. A fern. They'd left me a plant to look after while they took a vacation without me. I tried calling Mom once. It rang 4 times before she answered. Her voice was soft, uneasy. Hey, sweetie. Everything okay? No, I said plainly. You left without me. She sighed. Honey, your dad thought it would be easier this way. You two have been tense lately. He's been tense, I said. I've been quiet. Kylie, please. Don't start. That was her way of ending a conversation. I heard voices in the background, Sarah laughing, Dad saying something about traffic. Enjoy your trip, I said. Then I hung up. Around 3, the sky turned gray. Oregon weather has this way of matching your mood. I sat on the porch with a blanket and watched rain start to fall, slow and steady. Every drop felt like it was asking the same question. Why do you still expect them to choose you? I didn't have an answer. When I was younger, I used to wait by the window for Dad to come home from work. He'd pat my head, ask about school, then sit with Sarah to help her with homework while I watched from across the room. Back then, I thought it was just favoritism. But growing older taught me it was something else. He liked control, and I was too much like him. Maybe that's why we never fit. The rain grew heavier. I turned on the TV, flipping through channels without watching. My suitcase still sat by the door. For a moment, I thought about unpacking, but something in me refused. Instead, I dragged it back to my room. The zipper made the same sound as that morning, only this time it echoed. By evening, the loneliness felt physical. The house creaked, the fridge hummed, and I realized how quiet life becomes when nobody expects you. I microwaved soup, sat at the table, and tried to pretend it tasted like anything. Then my phone buzzed again, another message from Sarah. This time a group selfie. Them in front of the cabin, all smiles. Dad holding up a thumbs up. The caption read, "Family weekend begins." I don't know why, but I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because something in me finally broke through the sadness. Maybe it was disbelief, maybe exhaustion. I set the phone down and whispered, "Yeah, family." That was when the idea started forming. Not fully, not as a plan yet, but as a spark. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted fairness. I wanted the same peace they'd taken from me so easily. So I sat there, staring at my phone screen, my reflection faint against the glass. And I told myself, they won't learn until something finally costs them. At that point, I didn't even know what that meant. But I knew I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. As night fell, I made tea and curled up on the couch. The rain had turned to a soft drizzle. I checked my email for work updates, trying to feel normal again. That's when I saw it, an unread message from Everpine Cabins in my inbox. Subject line: Your upcoming reservation reminder. For a moment, I thought it was spam. Then I opened it, and my heart stuttered. It was a reminder for the cabin my dad and family were staying in. The account name read, Kylie Carter. I blinked twice, then remembered. Last year, Dad had asked me to handle the booking. He'd told me to use my account, since I had the app on my phone. I'd forgotten all about it. And apparently so had he. I stared at the email, the dates matching exactly with their trip. Payment confirmed. Linked to my old card on file. I leaned back slowly, the thought settling in. The cabin wasn't his booking. It was mine. A small, steady heat rose in my chest. Not anger this time, but clarity. They'd left me behind. They'd laughed. They'd erased me from the plan. But they had done it using something that still had my name on it. And suddenly, the words my dad said that morning came back in his voice, cold and casual. You were never invited. I whispered them out loud, tasting them like a challenge. Then, quietly, I said to myself, we'll see about that. When my dad's laughter echoed through the hallway that morning, I thought it would fade with time. But it didn't. It stayed, like a stubborn shadow that followed me into every corner of my thoughts, whispering reminders that I wasn't wanted. The words, you were never invited, replayed in my mind over and over, each time slicing a little deeper. That afternoon, the house felt heavier than ever. Mom was in the kitchen, her voice light as she hummed along to some old country song. She was packing sandwiches, chips, and drinks into a cooler. Every detail screamed family trip. And every sound, every rustle of a grocery bag, every pop of a soda can, echoed like a reminder that I wasn't part of it. Can you pass me the mustard, Kylie? she asked casually, not even looking up. I handed it to her silently. My throat burned, but I swallowed my words. What was I supposed to say? Why didn't you tell me? Why am I not going? I had already asked that morning, and Dad's laughter had answered everything. Instead, I stood there, watching her prepare the perfect lunch for everyone but me. The air smelled like ham sandwiches and betrayal. I went upstairs to my room and closed the door quietly. My bed looked untouched, the sunlight falling across the pale pink sheets I had begged for last year. Everything in that room felt the same, yet completely different. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my phone. Their family group chat was buzzing, Dad sending reminders, Mom sharing directions, my stepbrother posting jokes. My name wasn't in the thread. It stung. Not because of the trip itself, but because I had always tried so hard to belong. Dad had remarried 5 years ago. I was 15 when Lisa and her son, Trevor, moved in. I tried to make it work, to smile through the awkward dinners, to ignore how my dad's attention slowly shifted. But that morning his laughter confirmed what I had feared all along. I wasn't family. Not to him. Not anymore. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. The echo of his laugh turned into a loop in my head, louder than my thoughts. Then came the soft knock on the door. It was my mom, my stepmom. I corrected myself, though it still felt strange. She peeked in, smiling. Hey, sweetheart. You okay? I nodded automatically. Yeah, just tired. Her smile faltered a little. I know you were hoping to come, but your dad thought it might be better if you stayed. It's just a short cabin weekend. Next time maybe. Next time. The phrase made my stomach twist. I nodded again, pretending to be fine. She didn't notice how my hands were gripping the blanket, or how my smile trembled at the edges. She closed the door, humming as she walked away. The sound of her footsteps faded, but her words stayed behind like ghosts. I spent the rest of the afternoon in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there scrolling through old photos on my phone, family barbecues, movie nights, birthdays. I used to think those moments meant something. Then I stumbled on one photo, Dad holding Trevor on his shoulders, both laughing. I had taken that picture myself last summer. Dad had asked me to, and I remember thinking, maybe this is how families bond. But looking at it now, all I saw was how perfectly happy they were, without me in the frame. It was strange how memories could turn bitter. The next morning, the sound of their car starting woke me up. I looked out the window just in time to see them loading their bags. Dad was laughing again, loud, carefree. Lisa leaned against the car, smiling. Trevor ran around the driveway, tossing a football. No one looked up at my window. Not once. When they finally drove off, the house became painfully quiet. I sat there in my pajamas, watching the dust settle. Then I realized something. He hadn't even said goodbye. That realization hit me harder than anything else. For a while, I tried distracting myself. I cleaned the kitchen. I organized my closet. I even baked cookies just to fill the silence. But every time I checked my phone, there it was, a notification from social media. Dad had posted a picture. The perfect family getaway, the caption said. My heart clenched. There he was, smiling by the lake, arm around Lisa, Trevor holding up a fishing pole. They looked like a postcard family. And once again, I wasn't in the picture, literally or figuratively. I stared at the screen until the image blurred. Then, without thinking, I turned off my phone and pressed it against my chest like that could stop the ache inside. That evening, I went for a walk. The sky was turning orange, and the air smelled like wet grass after the sprinklers. I passed by the neighbor's house, where Mrs. Taylor was sitting on her porch with her dog. "Evenin', Kylie," she called. "Aren't you folks off on that cabin trip?" I froze. "No," I said, forcing a smile. "They went without me." "Oh honey," she said softly. "That doesn't sound right." I shrugged. "It's fine. I had stuff to do." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me, full of quiet sympathy. I hated it. I didn't want pity, I wanted answers. That night, the silence in the house grew louder. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. My reflection stared back, tired eyes, messy hair, a face that suddenly felt older than 18. I thought about calling my dad, asking him why. But I already knew what he'd say. That it wasn't personal. That I was overreacting. That sometimes plans just happen. But deep down, I also knew that wasn't the truth. This wasn't about a cabin. It was about belonging. About years of trying to fit into a puzzle where my piece no longer matched. The next morning, I tried focusing on something else. I made pancakes, opened the windows, let sunlight in. But the brightness felt forced. The silence still echoed. I wandered into Dad's study. A room I wasn't supposed to touch. His chair smelled faintly of his cologne. Papers were stacked neatly on his desk, and I noticed something that made me stop. A printed cabin itinerary. My name wasn't listed anywhere. I should have left it alone, but something inside me broke. I flipped through the papers and saw hotel bookings, meal plans, even fishing licenses, all organized, all perfect. And at the bottom, a note in his handwriting. Family weekend, Lisa, Trevor, me. That's all. I sat in his chair, gripping that paper until my knuckles turned white. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not anger exactly, but a cold kind of realization. I was done being the extra person in my own family. The following day, I got a text from Mom. No, from Lisa. Hope you're doing okay. We'll be home tomorrow evening. Save us some of those cookies, haha. That small message was the final straw. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Then I opened my laptop and started typing. Not a message. Not a rant. But something else entirely. Because if they could plan a weekend without me, maybe it was time I planned something of my own. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in days. Maybe it was the quiet acceptance, or maybe it was something else. The spark of an idea forming in my mind. The echo of being left out had turned into something else, something sharper, stronger. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was ready. Ready to remind them that even the people you leave behind can leave a mark you'll never forget. And that's exactly what I planned to do next. I woke up the next morning to sunlight pouring through the blinds, and a strange sense of calm. The ache that had haunted me since that morning, the one where my dad laughed and told me I wasn't invited, had dulled into something else. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. Something quieter, sharper. It wasn't anger that moved through me as I got out of bed. It was focus. A quiet, deliberate spark that whispered, they forgot me. Let's make sure they remember. The house was still empty, the air thick with the faint smell of their absence. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen with its half-empty cereal box, the living room with the blanket tossed on the couch, the study door slightly ajar. Each space reminded me of them, but not in a warm, nostalgic way. It reminded me of what they'd taken for granted. For years, I had been the quiet one. The understanding daughter who didn't argue, who smiled politely, who gave space. But that version of me had been left behind in that kitchen when Dad laughed. What remained was someone who didn't want to be ignored anymore. I made myself a cup of coffee, the bitter taste matching my mood. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where my stepmom had packed sandwiches 2 days ago, and opened my laptop. At first, I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a distraction. Maybe something to make the silence less deafening. But as I stared at the blinking cursor, that quiet spark inside me began to flicker into an idea. Dad had posted that picture, the perfect family getaway, on Facebook. Hundreds of likes. Dozens of comments about how happy and blessed he looked. It made me sick. So I clicked on it. Then I clicked share. But instead of reposting it, I typed something small. Simple. Honest. Funny how everyone looks happy when they forget who they left behind. I hit post before I could stop myself. Within minutes, the comments started rolling in. Wait, what happened, Kylie? Did they really go without you? Girl, that's cold. I hadn't planned it for attention. I hadn't planned it at all. But the words had power. They told the truth my dad had tried to hide behind smiles and captions. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. By noon, I was in the backyard watering the plants, trying to act normal. My phone buzzed every few seconds, but I ignored it. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that usually made me feel small and peaceful, but today it felt wide open, like opportunity. When I finally checked my phone, there were 2 missed calls from Dad and 1 from Lisa. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I texted one word back. Busy. And I was. Busy thinking, busy planning. Because the more I sat with my thoughts, the clearer they became. I wasn't going to yell, or cry, or beg to be included anymore. I was going to remind them, in my own quiet way, that actions have consequences. Later that evening, I walked into Dad's office again. His computer was on sleep mode, the faint hum of it filling the quiet. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity tugged at me. I moved the mouse and the screen lit up. A spreadsheet of finances, vacation plans, family expenses. My eyes skimmed the list until one detail caught my attention. Cabin rental, $2,300, paid in full. I leaned back in his chair, a slow, calculating thought forming. He had paid for everything up front. And all I could think was, they forgot me, but they still left something behind. The trip had been booked under his account. All the reservations, the payments, the contacts, they were all stored right here. That spark of revenge flickered brighter. No, I wasn't going to destroy anything. I wasn't cruel. But I wanted them to feel the same shock, the same sting of being blindsided. So I did something small. I opened his email, searched the booking confirmation for the cabin. And there it was, the rental agreement, the host's contact information, even the access code for the smart lock. I hovered over the edit reservation button, my heart pounding. My hands trembled, but I took a breath. Then I changed the checkout date. Just one day earlier. Nothing dramatic. Nothing illegal. Just inconvenient. They'd have to pack up early, drive back tired and confused, wondering how things got mixed up. When I hit Save Changes, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not joy. Not satisfaction. Just balance. The rest of the day passed slowly. I made dinner, cleaned up, and curled on the couch with a blanket. Every so often, I'd imagine them sitting around that cabin, thinking everything was perfect. I smiled to myself. They'd find out soon enough. But revenge, I was learning, wasn't always about payback. Sometimes it was about reclaiming power. And for once, I didn't feel powerless. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Trevor. Trevor. Hey, what did you do? Dad's freaking out. The cabin owner says we have to leave early. I blinked at the screen, biting my lip to hide my grin. Me. Oh really? That's weird. Must be a mistake. A minute later, another message appeared. Trevor. Dad thinks you changed something. He's mad. I didn't reply. Instead, I put my phone down, took a long sip of orange juice, and looked out the window. The morning sunlight was softer today. By afternoon, the calls started again, Dad's name flashing on the screen every few minutes. I finally answered, keeping my tone light. Hey Dad, I said sweetly. Kylie, what did you do? His voice was tight, controlled, the way it got when he was trying not to yell. I'm not sure what you mean, I said. Something wrong. The cabin owner said someone changed the booking dates. It's a mess. We have to check out a day early and Lisa's upset. Did you touch my account? I smiled faintly. Dad, I've been home all weekend. Alone. What would I even do with your account? There was silence on the line. Then a sigh. Kylie, this isn't funny. Neither is being told I was never invited, I said quietly. The silence stretched longer this time. Finally, he muttered, We'll talk when I get home, and hung up. When the call ended, I just sat there for a moment, my heart pounding. I expected guilt to rise up, but it didn't. Instead, I felt steady. Because for once, he had to think about me. Even if it was just through frustration, I wasn't invisible anymore. That night, I made popcorn and watched an old movie. Halfway through, my phone buzzed again, this time with a picture. It was the three of them in the car, looking tired and grumpy. The caption read, Change of plans. Heading home early. I laughed softly. The sound surprised me. It wasn't cruel, just honest. For the first time since everything happened, I didn't feel small or forgotten. I felt present. In control. But as the night grew quiet, a strange mix of emotions settled in. I wasn't sure if I felt proud or sad. Revenge, even in its gentlest form, came with a cost. I thought about the little girl who used to wait by the window for her dad to come home from work. The one who'd jump into his arms when he walked through the door. I missed her. I missed the version of me who believed that love alone could fix everything. But I wasn't her anymore. The next morning, I woke up early. The driveway was still empty. They hadn't come back yet. I made myself breakfast and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. And in that quiet moment, I realized something important. The revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about being seen. About reminding myself that I mattered, even if he couldn't see it yet. Sometimes, when people push you out of their story, the only way to survive is to start writing your own. And that's what I was doing. One quiet, deliberate act at a time. When their car finally pulled into the driveway that afternoon, I was ready. I stood at the window, arms crossed, calm and composed. Dad stepped out first, his face unreadable. Lisa followed, muttering something under her breath. Trevor just looked annoyed. I didn't rush out to greet them. I didn't ask how their trip went. I simply watched, quietly, as they unloaded their things. Dad glanced up once and saw me. Our eyes met for a second. And for the first time in a long while he looked unsure. I turned away and smiled. That was enough. The quiet spark inside me had done its job. It had turned pain into purpose. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would change everything between us. But for now, I was content to let the silence speak for me. Because sometimes, the softest revenge is simply letting them feel the echo of what they made you feel, forgotten. And now they finally did. The day after they got back was quiet, almost eerily so. I thought they'd storm into the house that morning, full of complaints and accusations, but no one came to my room. The silence stretched through the walls like a strange truce I hadn't agreed to. By noon, I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, pretending to scroll through recipes, but my mind was elsewhere. I could still see the look on Dad's face when he saw me at the window. The uncertainty, the hint of guilt. It had been subtle, but it was there. And that look had said more than any apology ever could. Still, I knew him too well to think it was over. Dad never let things go quietly. He was the kind of man who needed to have the last word, to feel like he'd handled every situation, even the ones he caused. So I waited. And then, late that afternoon, the phone finally rang. I glanced at the screen. Dad. For a few seconds, I just stared at his name, letting the sound of the ringtone fill the kitchen. My heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from something else. A mix of anticipation and quiet satisfaction. I took a slow breath and answered. Hey, I said softly, my tone calm, controlled. Kylie. His voice was sharp, like he'd been rehearsing what to say all day. We need to talk. I figured, I said, taking a sip of tea. There was a pause. What exactly did you do? About what? Don't play games, he snapped. The cabin. The canceled reservation. The date changes. The owner said it was done from the same email that made the booking. That's weird, I said, keeping my voice steady. Must have been some kind of glitch. Kylie, stop it. His tone dropped lower, more serious. You think this is funny? You ruined our weekend. I smiled faintly to myself, though he couldn't see it. I didn't ruin it. I just didn't save it either. Don't start with that attitude, he said, his voice tightening. I don't know what you were trying to prove. I wasn't trying to prove anything, I interrupted. You made it pretty clear what I meant to this family. There was silence. Long, heavy silence. Then in a softer voice he said, Kylie, you're overreacting. You always take things too personally. The familiar phrase hit like a slap. I'd heard it my whole life. When I cried as a kid, when I got left out of family plans, when I tried to talk about how invisible I felt, he'd always said that. You're too sensitive. But something in me shifted this time. I wasn't going to shrink back. Dad, I said quietly, you told me I wasn't invited. And you laughed. You don't get to decide how I react to that. He exhaled sharply, like he was trying to stay calm. You can't just mess with people's plans because you're upset. That's not how adults handle things. And how do they handle it? I asked, my voice still calm. By excluding their daughter from family trips? Lisa thought it would be best, he said quickly, too quickly. It was supposed to be simple this time. Less stress. I almost laughed. Less stress? You mean less me? Kylie, that's not fair. No, I said, setting my cup down. What's not fair is pretending everything's fine while you keep pushing me out like I'm some inconvenience. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear him breathing on the other end, slow and uneven. Then, in a tone I hadn't heard from him in years, he said quietly, "You really hurt them, you know." I froze. I hurt them? Yes, Sarah cried. Lisa's furious. They think you're being cruel. The words hit hard, not because they were true, but because they reminded me of every time I'd been blamed for simply reacting to pain. Dad, I said softly, you can't expect me to stay quiet forever. He sighed, and for a brief second, I thought he might apologize. But instead he said, "You've always had a flair for drama. Maybe you should have thought about the bigger picture before you did something so childish." That word, childish. I bit my lip, holding back the sting of tears. You know what's childish? Laughing at your daughter when she's crying. That's childish. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. Then in a measured tone I said, "You asked what I did. I'll tell you. I made sure you felt, for once, what it's like to be forgotten." His breath caught. "Because that's how you made me feel every time you told me to understand. Every time you told me not to take things personally. Every time you acted like I was too much to deal with. I didn't do it to destroy anything. I just stopped pretending I was okay with being left behind." The phone stayed quiet. I could almost picture him, standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. Finally he muttered, "We'll talk later," and hung up. The call ended, but the tension didn't. It stayed in the air, like static before a storm. I sat there for a while, staring at the quiet phone. The rush I'd felt earlier began to fade, replaced by something heavier. Guilt wasn't the right word, it was more like exhaustion. A deep, emotional tiredness that comes from finally standing up for yourself after years of swallowing your words. That night, the house was tense. No one said much. I heard them in the living room, muffled voices, the clinking of dishes, the occasional sigh. I stayed in my room, listening to the sound of the clock ticking on my nightstand. Part of me wondered if I should have gone further. Another part of me wondered if I already had. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Lisa sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone. She looked up when she saw me, her face tight with polite restraint. "Morning," I said softly. She gave a small nod. "Morning." I poured myself coffee and sat across from her. The silence between us felt thick. Finally, she set her phone down. "You know," she said carefully, "you didn't have to do that. The trip. The cancellation. It hurt Sarah." I looked at her. Did it hurt her more than being told I wasn't invited? Lisa sighed. "You took it too far." I shrugged. "Maybe. But you all took it too far years ago." She frowned. "You think this is helping?" "No," I said simply. "But at least it's honest." She didn't have a response to that. She just stared for a moment before standing up and walking out. I didn't stop her. Hours passed before my phone rang again. This time, it was Trevor. My brother. He never got involved in family drama. He stayed neutral, calm, logical. But now his voice was tense. "Kai," he said, "you really messed things up." "I just made a small change," I said. "Yeah, well, small changes can blow up big." He sighed. "Dad's been pacing around all morning. He won't admit it, but he's embarrassed. Everyone at work saw the trip photos before they got deleted." "I didn't post anything else," I said. "Doesn't matter," Trevor said. "He feels stupid. Like he lost control of his own family." I stayed silent. Then he added, "He's not used to you pushing back." That made me pause. "What do you mean?" "You've always let him win," he said gently. "You never fought back, Kentucky." He didn't expect this. There was something about the way Trevor said it, soft, understanding, that loosened something in my chest. "I'm not doing this to win," I said. "I'm just done being quiet." "I get that," Trevor said. "But don't burn everything down, okay?" I smiled faintly. "Don't worry. I'm not setting fires. I'm just letting some light in." He laughed softly, but it faded into a sigh. "Just be careful, okay? He doesn't handle being challenged well." "I know," I said quietly. But maybe it's time he learns. That night, my phone buzzed again. A text this time from Dad. Dad, we'll talk tomorrow. No yelling. Just talk. I stared at it for a long moment before replying. Me, okay. And for the first time in days, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but maybe the faintest possibility of understanding. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew how my dad worked. He'd start calm, try to reason, maybe even twist the story until I felt guilty again. But I also knew this time was different. Because now, I wasn't scared of the silence anymore. I wasn't scared of being misunderstood. I had found my voice, and even if it trembled when I spoke, it was still mine. So as I turned off my phone and lay in bed, I told myself one simple truth. Sometimes, the real confrontation doesn't happen when people shout. It happens in the moments of quiet, when you refuse to shrink anymore. And tomorrow, when that conversation came, I was going to meet it with that same quiet strength. No yelling. No crying. Just honesty. Because the girl who once waited for her dad's approval was gone. And in her place stood someone who finally knew her worth. The first thing I noticed that morning was silence. Not the kind that feels empty or lonely, but the kind that hums softly, like the world is finally at ease. I stood by the cabin window, my hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea, watching the golden light stretch over the pine trees. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like an outsider. I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I felt free. When Dad canceled my trip, I thought I'd spend that weekend crying, scrolling through photos of the cabin, wondering what I'd done wrong. But instead, I ended up here, alone in peace. I'd booked a small lake cabin just 2 hours away, a place that smelled like cedar and rain. I didn't plan it out of revenge, not at first. I planned it because I needed air. I needed quiet. I needed to remember what it felt like to take up space without apologizing. As I walked outside, the cool air brushed my face, carrying the sound of birds and the distant ripple of water. I breathed deeply. The weight that had sat on my chest since that awful morning when Dad laughed at me, it began to lift. Slowly. Gently. Around noon, I decided to explore the lake trail. The path wound through a grove of birch trees, their white trunks gleaming in the sunlight. Each step felt like I was walking away from the noise of my family's drama, away from my father's mocking laughter, from Emily's smug silence, from the version of myself that kept begging for approval. When I reached the dock, the water shimmered like glass. I slipped off my shoes and let my feet dangle just above the surface. The stillness was healing. It gave me time to think, not about revenge or anger, but about what kind of peace I actually wanted. I thought about how often I'd tried to fit into their picture-perfect family moments, even when I wasn't really wanted there. I'd always assumed love meant staying, even when it hurt. But sitting there, feeling the sun on my skin, I realized maybe love also means letting go. Not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Later that afternoon, I cooked myself a simple meal, grilled vegetables, a small steak and lemon water. I turned on some music and opened all the windows. The cabin filled with the smell of rosemary and laughter, the kind that came from me, not from anyone else. For years, I'd measured happiness by their moods. If Dad was happy, I was happy. If he was distant, I felt invisible. But here, surrounded by nothing but trees and light, I learned something new. Peace doesn't depend on who stays. It grows when you finally stop chasing who left. My phone sat on the table, face down. I hadn't touched it since I arrived. But when I picked it up to check the time, I noticed dozens of missed notifications. Texts, calls, even voicemails. My heart gave a slow, ironic laugh. Dad. Emily. Even Mom. Apparently, their perfect weekend getaway hadn't gone as planned. Out of curiosity, I played one of the voicemails. Dad's voice came through, sounding more tired than I'd ever heard it. Kylie, call me when you get this. Something's happened. We had a mix-up with the cabin reservation. It's complicated. Just call me back, okay? I almost smiled. The universe had a sense of humor after all. I didn't rush to call him back. I just let the message fade into the background noise of my cabin. Instead, I poured myself another cup of tea and stepped outside again. The sky was starting to shift into a soft orange glow. I sat on the porch swing, listening to the creak of wood beneath me, and let my thoughts drift. What if this was the start of something new? Not revenge, not bitterness, but reclamation of peace, self-worth, and boundaries. Maybe that was what this weekend was meant to teach me. That night, I built a small fire in the pit outside. The crackle of wood filled the quiet space as I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. For a long time, I just watched the flames dance, remembering all the times I'd sat in the background while my family laughed around a fire just like this. Never really included, always half present. And yet here I was, laughing softly to myself, feeling whole. It was funny how solitude, something I used to fear, had turned into my safe place. Every flame that flickered reminded me of strength I didn't know I had. I realized I wasn't running away anymore. I was just finally standing still. The next morning, I woke up early again. Mist hovered over the lake, and the world looked like it was wrapped in silver. I grabbed a notebook I'd brought and started to write. Not a revenge plan, not a letter to my dad, but thoughts. Honest ones. I wrote about how it felt to be dismissed, how it hurt to watch my own father treat me like a stranger. But I also wrote about how good it felt to breathe freely again, to make decisions for myself, to rediscover joy without waiting for anyone's permission. By the time I closed the notebook, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just felt ready to move forward, whatever that meant. Around noon, I decided to drive into the nearby town. It was small, just a few diners, a local market, and a bookstore that looked like it hadn't changed in 20 years. I spent hours wandering the aisles, picking up used novels and chatting with the kind old woman who ran the shop. She asked what brought me there, and I smiled. Peace, I said simply. She nodded knowingly. That's what we all end up chasing at some point, dear. Sometimes it's not a place we find, it's something we build inside. Her words stayed with me the rest of the day. When I returned to the cabin that evening, I noticed the sky turning pink behind the mountains. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Dad. This time, it wasn't about the trip, it was an apology. Kylie, I'm sorry. I messed up. You didn't deserve that. Can we talk when you're back? I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to call him right then. But another part, the part that had finally found peace, knew it could wait. Some conversations are better when your heart isn't still bleeding. So instead, I set the phone down and walked to the dock again. I let the last bit of daylight touch my face and whispered a quiet promise to myself. Never again will I beg for a seat at a table that doesn't see my worth. The rest of the weekend unfolded like a soft melody, gentle and freeing. I painted on the porch, cooked simple meals, watched the stars at night, and let silence be my friend. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I didn't need to explain or justify why I'd chosen peace over chaos. For once, I was living for me. By Sunday afternoon, as I packed my things, I realized that this weekend had changed something deep inside me. I wasn't the same girl who cried in her room when her father laughed at her pain. I was stronger now, calmer, surer of what I deserved. When I took one last look at the lake, I smiled. Thank you, I whispered, to the silence, the trees, the sky. Because somehow, they'd given me what I'd been searching for all along, myself. As I drove away, my phone buzzed again, but this time, I didn't rush to check it. I turned up the radio instead, singing along to a song I hadn't heard in years. Peace, I realized, isn't about having no noise. It's about knowing which noise you'll no longer let in. And with that thought, I left the cabin behind, not as someone abandoned, but as someone reborn.